Now starting, all attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, welcome to this recorded presentation. My name is Stacy Jones and I am DDA's Statewide Career and Employment Services Coordinator. The recording you're about to listen to has been updated to combine two previously recorded webinars. One from July of 2018 entitled Bringing It All Together, Part 1, and the second is from November of 2018 called Bringing It All Together, Part 2. Both of those previously recorded webinars have been removed and replaced with this single recording, which has been updated with corrected or updated information that changed since the originally recorded June webinar. Note that if you're watching this via DDA's YouTube channel, you can take a look in the description box below this video to see timestamps of various sections of the webinar. While I certainly hope you'll listen to the whole video, if you don't have time or you prefer to just reference a particular spot in the video, those timestamps will make finding those things a little bit easier for you. What I'll be walking through during this recording is an overview of DDA's Employment First Systems trajectory, as well as an overview of DDA's Meaningful Day services. This will include current Meaningful Day services, as well as the new menu of employment services that are targeted to become available after July 1st, 2020. Towards the end, I'll be touching briefly on some new training requirements for a few of our employment services. I'll discuss transportation with Meaningful Day services, and I'll go more in depth into service alignment and what should be happening now and later. And at the end, finally, I'll wrap up with what's still to come, as well as providing a few links of resources that you might find helpful. Let's start first with a visual to get us on the road here and provide the backdrop for DDA's transformation efforts. And many of you have seen this graphic before, but those of you that haven't, it's a visual that we call a life course trajectory that's used as a tool when supporting people to create a vision for their good life. And when I say people, I mean all of us. This is not a disability-specific tool or picture. You see that there's a person's lifespan represented at the bottom. And for this particular slide, I'm using the trajectory not for a particular person, but instead to represent DDA's entire system. Our vision starts with the fact that we are an employment first system, meaning that we believe if people want to work, they can work if the person has the right supports and it's happening in the right setting. Simply speaking, we want people of working age with intellectual and/or developmental disabilities to see work and employment as the first and preferred outcome for their lives and as their preferred service choice. But in order for that vision to come to pass, our system, our stakeholders, and our community at large all have some part to play in this. So for this PowerPoint, I'll be talking specifically about DDA's system change in relation to this trajectory toward employment first. I think a worthy exercise when it becomes a challenge to keep our clarity in the midst of all this systems change is to continually begin again with the why. Why are we making changes? Why is our system changing? Why are things getting seemingly more complex? There are many whys, but again, for the scope of this particular recording, we're focusing on the whys related to Meaningful Day services and employment first. And above, you'll see some graphics from the previous slide, and you see what DDA wants more of in our system. We want a focus on employment, true community participation for people. We want people to have person-centered and flexible lives. Also noted here is that our system has to have the capacity to provide the supports and services to deliver on this vision. And conversely, on the bottom of the slide, you can see a list of the things that we don't want to see, or we want to see less of. Things like unemployment for people that are receiving services, isolation, poverty, segregation, low expectations being placed on people, and people living what we would call an eligibility support only lives. Now, obviously, these lists are not exhaustive, but they do help paint a picture of where we are headed and why we are headed there. Keeping those things in mind, we're going to get into specifics about DDA's Meaningful Day services. And you'll hear us at DDA use the term meaningful day as a way to denote DDA's entire menu of employment and day services. And I'll get into specifics of what that menu is in a few minutes. The next two slides are simply to provide some references and reminders about the various initiatives that DDA is engaged in related to this trajectory. Many of you, it's possible you've heard me talk extensively about these things in the past, but I really wanted to take the time to include them in this presentation. You'll note the items that are underlined throughout the presentation contain hyperlinks. So if you download this PowerPoint, you'll be able to click directly on the PDF version, and the link will take you to some other additional resource that I've included related to that particular piece of information. So you certainly don't have to, but it just provided another level of information. So what is DDA doing to align our system to these values? Well, DDA and the rest of Maryland's Employment First partners have what we call an Employment First State Leadership Team, which shares an Employment First vision as well as a strategic plan, which is currently available on DDA's website. DDA continues to also collaborate with other state agency partners, and if you click on the hyperlink, you'll be taken to a YouTube video highlighting ways in which Maryland partners are collaborating directly related to employment outcomes. DDA is realigning its service system to better support employment outcomes, and that's what I'll talk about for the majority of today's presentation. And then finally, DDA is supporting capacity building to both service providers and our own internal DDA staff to better support those employment outcomes. Examples here include things like technical assistance opportunities, in-person trainings, virtual trainings, several years worth of webinars, ongoing internal trainings on Employment First, and other meaningful day service changes. Other activities related to DDA's Employment First trajectory include the current phase out of Department of Labor 14C certificates. And again, those certificates allow service providers to pay subminimum wage, and that has to end by September of 2020. That phase out is well underway, and if you click on the hyperlink, you'll be taken to the most recent October 2018 report to legislators from the Maryland Department of Disability and DDA that outlines details and data related to this phase out, in case you're interested. DDA has engaged in an independent rate setting study that will aid in developing a billing and payment system and a payment schedule for all funded services, and we're moving closer to the testing phases of that in coming months. Since 2014, DDA has engaged in what we call our Employment Data Initiative through our partnership with the Institute for Community Inclusion at UMass Boston, or what we call ICI. This link will take you to DDA's public data page where you can search for data related to outcomes for people receiving any of our Meaningful Day services. So data points are collected by service providers twice annually. That typically happens one time in the spring and one time in the fall, and includes data like percentage of people that are working, percentage of people engaging in community-based non-work activities, and average percentage of hours worked and hours paid. The data can be sorted easily according to individual provider agencies. You can sort according to Maryland's 4 DDA regions, and you can also look at data points statewide as well as across time through the years. This data allows state-level tracking of our service change efforts and whether they may be leading to the outcomes we want to see. And it also allows provider agencies to track data at their own level as they engage in transformation efforts. Another important initiative over the past year, in 2018, DDA began what we call non-residential site validation visits. And this was to ensure that providers are in compliance with CMS's final rule. And if you're unfamiliar with the final rule and what it means, you can use the link that I provided here to get more information about that. But the short answer is that it ensures that people receiving home and community-based services that are funded through Medicaid waivers receive those services in integrated settings, and they provide opportunities for people to engage in community life, including employment, to the same degree as people who are not receiving those services. And finally, DDA continues to strive to provide resources related to all things Employment First. So this link will take you to the Employment First webpage, which is accessible from DDA's main website. It includes resources, webinar links, newsletters, and lots of really good stuff. So if you're not on our mailing list, I would highly encourage that you get on it so that you're receiving all of the most updated information. Okay, so now that we've gotten the basic background information and framework related to DDA's Employment First trajectory out of the way, we're going to do a deeper dive into DDA's Meaningful Day services. And as mentioned earlier, DDA has been working to realign its service delivery system to support the outcomes of employment, and in particular, competitive integrated employment, as well as meaningful community participation for people in services. We see the Meaningful Day services as a way to support people on their path to employment, no matter where someone might be on that path. And that includes people that might not be currently working or might not be currently interested in work, as well as people that have passed working age, where services might be used to support retirement activities in integrated settings. So as a general reminder, Meaningful Day services are not meant to serve as respite or daycare, but instead should be habilitative in nature, meaning they should include skill building or maintenance of skills that ultimately help people reach individually identified outcomes and goals. So again, Meaningful Day services are designed to provide opportunities for people to be supported on every part of their path to employment, and that's regardless of their disability or support needs. They are designed to help people work in integrated employment, to develop skills throughout their lifespan, engage in community life, and to control personal resources. So if we think about our long-standing day in employment service model in Maryland, we see a few basic service buckets. One is what we generally call day services, which has traditionally included day habilitation and community learning services, and our employment services, which include supported employment and employment discovery and customization. And these services have been structured around providing a billable day and have been attendance-based. And the challenge with this current system is that a person can only be in one meaningful day service per day. So this doesn't really allow for very much flexibility for people that may be working part of the day or doing other community-based activities for the rest of the day. And for people that may not need or want a full day of support for whatever reason. There just is not the flexibility there that people need in their lives. So the other issue is that our system has not typically been focused on actual outcomes. Again, services have traditionally been based on attendance. That fact is why our employment outcome data system that I mentioned a few slides ago is so important, because that data really allows us to see what's actually going on with people and outcomes separate from the services that a person might be accessing. So moving forward, as I said, DDA is designing a much more flexible service delivery system that's focused on real opportunities to seek and gain competitive integrated employment, develop skills, engage in community life, control personal resources. We want to support the move away from those traditional facility-based and one-size-fits-all approaches. And instead, we're creating and phasing in a menu of services that are not designed to be a specific continuum. In other words, really moving away from what we call the readiness model, which in the past, perhaps a person was asked to prove that they're ready to work by being in a particular service first and doing particular facility-based work. This future menu of services allows people to more flexibly access particular services when it makes sense for them. And on my next slide, I'm going to give you a visual of this phase-in, but know that after July 1st, 2020, we will be phasing in a fee-for-service model that will include different payment and billing structures, as opposed to the attendance-based system I just referenced. This system will be heavily focused on employment and community life engagement for people, no matter where they are along their personal trajectories. It's important that before I move on to the actual service descriptions that everyone is firmly grounded on the timelines for each service. So this chart just shows all of our meaningful day services split into two columns. On the left, you'll see a list of meaningful day services that are currently available in both the capped community supports waiver as well as the comprehensive community pathways waiver. Denoted on the left are the two services that will be phasing out at the end of June 2020. So you can see supported employment and employment discovery and customization are phasing out. On the right-hand side in pink, you can see the entire menu of meaningful day services that will be available beginning July 1st, 2020, also in both of those waivers. I want to highlight some resources about where to find DDA's meaningful day service definitions, because this is a question I get asked fairly frequently. So for those of you that haven't had a chance to review the waivers, I would recommend taking a look. I've provided links to both waiver applications, both of which are available also on DDA's website. All of the information that I'll be covering comes from the waivers, but this presentation allows us to kind of walk through the basic information that I've pulled out so we can kind of walk through it together. Also note under each waiver on this slide, I denoted when the federal CMS community settings rule requirements for all services must be met. So for the community supports waiver, all settings and all services must be in compliance immediately. And for community pathways waiver services, they have to be in compliance by March of 2022. Okay, now I'm going to start digging into the service definitions. So please note that the slides I'm going to provide have information again that's directly from the waiver application. So if you'd like to read further, go to the links that I provided. This is a really extremely brief overview. Supported employment is our first service. Again, this service is set to phase out at the end of June 2020. Supported employment includes a variety of supports to help a person identify career and employment interests, as well as to find and keep a competitive integrated job. Activities under supported employment can include things like individualized job development and placement, on-the-job training, facilitation of natural supports in the workplace, ongoing job supports, and monitoring in order to retain employment and self-employment supports. These services can happen in a variety of community settings, but note that supported employment services do not include volunteering, internships, or apprenticeships unless it is part of the discovery process and is time limited in nature. Also note that supported employment is a completely community-based service that does not happen in a licensed site or facility. So note that this service does not support facility-based employment or small and large group employment outcomes. And when we get to the service later on called career exploration, I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I just wanted to mention that to get you thinking. All right, so some key requirements for supported employment. Again, this is support to find and keep competitive integrated work. Staffing is based on the level of service need. Supported employment, like all of our current meaningful day services, can be mixed with other meaningful day services within the same week. The service unit for supported employment is a 6-hour day, and that is based on a 4-hour minimum for billing. And let me clarify this, because many people believe that this means that there is a requirement that a person must work in a job 4 hours a day to access this service. However, the requirement is that the person must be engaged in supported employment activities for at least 4 hours. So, for example, if a person's working for 1 hour, or 2 hours, or 3 hours, the question would be, what other types of supported employment activities could they be engaging in when they're not working? And the list that I'm about to give you is just a few examples, but really it should be based on the person's own needs. So it could include things like travel training, learning to ride the local public transportation to and from work, working on extending their workday by maybe learning some new skills for their job, working on building up stamina to increase their workday. It really should be person-centered, but I just wanted to make that clear that it's a 4-hour minimum for supported employment activities, not specifically that it has to be competitive employment for that entire 4 hours. So this service can happen any day of the week as long as it does not go over 5 billable days within the 7-day week. So it's very frequent that people work on the weekends and they may need supported employment services on the weekends. However, if they receive those services on a Saturday and or Sunday, the days that that person receives that support throughout the week would need to be reduced. To provide this service, you must be an approved supported employment provider. Okay, our next currently available service is called Employment Discovery and Customization, or ED&C. And just like supported employment, this service will also be phasing out at the end of June 2020. This service is time limited to 6 months and is designed to identify and develop customized employment options for people working toward integrated employment. The discovery aspect of this service typically describes a set of strategies based on best practices that are focused on helping a person identify whatever their particular ideal conditions for employment might be. The customization part of the service could include using a person's family or social network to identify potential connections, which hopefully will lead to employment. And strategies could include things like job development, job carving, and self-employment development. A couple of key requirements for ED&C. Just like supported employment, this is a community-based service, not happening in a facility. And it also can be mixed with other meaningful day services within the same week. Current service unit is also a 6-hour day, again, also based on at least a 4-hour minimum for billing. To provide this service, you must be a DDA-approved employment discovery and customization provider. Our next service is called Community Development Services. This is not a new service. There was just a change to the name. So the service was previously called Community Learning Services. So if you remember that name, it's the same service, just a name change. So Community Development Services, or CDS, is designed to facilitate the development of community membership and opportunities to develop skills, increase independence related to community integration with mostly people without disabilities. So possible activities could include supporting a person's path to employment, travel training, self-advocacy skill development, accessing local community events, volunteering. All of those things should be based on a person's interests and their skills and their abilities and what kind of things they have going on in their lives. Some key requirements for CDS. This service differs from more traditional day hab services in that none of the services occur in a provider-owned or operated facility. Instead, services should be occurring in typical integrated community settings. This allows for access to community settings that meet each person's personal goals and allows for development of relationships which build with other community members who are not people with disabilities and not paid staff. CDS is meant to be a home-to-community service. This means that a CDS provider would typically provide or coordinate transportation from the person's home directly to the place in which the service is taking place and provide or coordinate the transportation back home again at the completion of the service. This service is provided in groups of no more than 4 people receiving services together at a time. And this is to be sure that integration and the facilitation of those community life engagement pieces with other community members can successfully occur. Groups can be smaller than 4, but it's simply the largest number. And again, while this isn't a new service, I do want to note that there are 2 additions to the service definition in the newest waiver amendment this past July. First, if someone is accessing this service, the service provider must help create an individualized schedule that will be used to help provide an estimate of what the person will do, where the person's going to spend their time when they're in this service. And the individualized schedule should really be based on information found in the person-centered plan. This individualized schedule can absolutely change. It's based on the person's changing interests. Different factors might come up. But it's really just a way to show how the service is going to be used to support that particular person in their outcomes and goals. So in other words, it's not just a general schedule that's used to kind of plug people into various activities that have been planned for multiple groups of people. It really should be individualized. And another change that I want to note is that people may return to their home or to a provider-operated site during time-limited periods of the day due to lack of accessible restrooms and public areas to support things like personal care, health, emotional, and behavioral needs as indicated in the person-centered plan. Let me note, these situations should be rare and should always be adequately documented in the person-centered plan ahead of time to document that other alternatives have been explored. This is not meant to be used for groups of people to go back to a day program for convenience or to go back every day for lunch. It's intended to provide flexibility for people with specific and time-limited support needs that cannot be addressed in some other way and that have been documented. And any plan to do this should be outlined under what circumstance it will happen and for what length of time. And just a note that this service cannot happen at the same time as a residential service. So the service units for community development services, it's also a 6-hour day based on a 4-hour minimum for billing. And after July 2020, this service will then become an hourly billable service. Currently, CDS can be mixed with other services within the same week, and after July 2020, it can be mixed with other services within the same day. In order to provide CDS services, you must be approved to provide the service. Just like supported employment, this service can be billed any day of the week. However, currently, it cannot be billed more than 5 days in a 7-day week, pardon me. Once the service changes to hourly billing, it will be limited to a maximum of 40 hours within a week. Okay, next we're moving on to day habilitation services. And this service is intended to support a person to develop and maintain skills related to activities of daily living. Things like employment, socialization, the use of formalized teaching methods like systematic instruction to help participate in meaningful activities. Day habilitation services are designed to promote greater independence and personal choice and can include things like learning skills for employment, effective communication, social skills, self-advocacy, problem solving, and volunteering. Some key requirements for day habilitation. This service is provided in a variety of settings in the community and a licensed facility, but please note that all sites have to be in compliance with the CMS final rule, as I mentioned earlier in this presentation. If supports in this setting are happening under the Community Supports Waiver, they must be in compliance immediately. If services are occurring under the Community Pathways Waiver, the site must be in compliance by March of 2022. Staffing is based on the level of service needed. Personal care must not comprise the entirety of this service, and day habilitation can be mixed with other meaningful day services within the same week, just like the previous services I mentioned. So just like community development services, day habilitation services had a change in service requirements to include that creation of that individualized schedule, again, used to provide an estimate of what the person will be doing, where the person will be spending their time when in this service. These schedules should be based on information found in the person-centered plan. And again, the individualized schedule is not meant to be set in stone. Again, it's used as a reference point to give an idea of how people are going to be spending their days and their week in the service. So currently, day habilitation service unit is a 6-hour day, again, based on that 4-hour minimum. And after July 2020, this will also shift to become an hourly service. Just like our previous services, it can currently be mixed with other meaningful day services within the same week, and after July 2020, it can be mixed with other services within the same day. Day habilitation services are limited to Monday through Friday and no more than 8 hours a day. And to provide this service, you must be a licensed DDA day habilitation service provider. Next, I want to spend quite a few slides talking through our next service called Career Exploration. Out of all the current or future meaningful day services, this one seems to be the one that causes the most questions and that people have the most concerns or can't quite understand. So it's my hope that if I can kind of walk through one piece at a time, it's going to really help provide a little bit more background and clarity. So bear with me as I give some background and kind of walk through each piece at a time. Career Exploration is a currently available service. And while the name of the service, Career Exploration, is new, it's not really a new service. Okay, so instead, it really takes some of the outcomes and activities that have previously been funded under day habilitation or what we used to call vocational services and supported employment and pulls them out into this service. And last year when DDA first put this service in our waiver applications to CMS, we had called the service Transitional Employment. But we were asked to change the name at the request of CMS when it was submitted for approval. So that's why there was a name change to Career Exploration. Our current service, called Supported Employment, which was the first service I discussed today, has traditionally included a wide variety of paid employment outcomes for people receiving that service. And because Supported Employment, as a waiver service, is targeted to phase out, we needed to have a service that would allow us to pull certain activities and outcomes that would not fit under our new menu of employment services. So, specifically, we needed a service that could potentially include non-competitive employment outcomes from supported employment and allow people time to phase those activities out through this new service name. And we'll talk in a minute about the definition of competitive integrated employment, so just put a pin in that for now. And next, we needed to remove paid employment from underneath day services and out from vocational services because there's currently no service called vocational services. And finally, we needed to align with CMS's guidance related to employment and what they call pre-vocational services. Okay, bear with me one second. To make sense of the creation of the Career Exploration Service, I do want to provide a bit more background. DDA is realigning its employment services to align with the definition of competitive integrated employment, or what I will call from here on out, CIE. So let's start by briefly going over the definition of CIE. We get our definition from what is called the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA. WIOA is the federal law that was passed back in 2014, and it replaces the 1998 Workforce Investment Act. WIOA is really the primary workforce development legislation that focuses heavily on the coordination among both federal and state programs around workforce development. And if you want to read more about WIOA, you're lucky, because I've provided a link for you here at the top of the screen there. And one more important thing that is highlighted in WIOA that I'm going to talk about is the definition of CIE. And the basic definition as it is stated here is it's full or part-time work at minimum wage or higher with wages and benefits that are similar to those without disabilities, performing the same work, and the work is fully integrated in the community with coworkers without disabilities. So back in June of this year, DDA and the Division of Rehab Services, also known as DOORS, collaborated and aligned on the use of this WIOA definition of CIE as the preferred outcome for people utilizing both types of funding. So if anyone's dying to hear more about that, specifically the DOORS DDA MOU, you can find the archived webinar as well as the signed memo of understanding between the two agencies if you go to the hyperlink at the top of this page, and it's also on the DDA website. So DDA is continuing to develop policy and guidance related to identifying CIE. And again, we're continuing to work closely with DOORS on that by creating a joint checklist for CIE that both state agencies will continue to have alignment on this moving forward. While the information in the next couple of slides is not representative of an official DDA policy or an official CIE checklist, it does give examples of commonly recognized attributes of CIE. So first, is the job competitive? And what kind of evidence would we look for to say that it's competitive? Well, the position is part of the open labor market and is not a position that's reserved specifically for a person with a disability. And if that person were to leave the job, another person with a disability would be the only person to have the opportunity for that job. The person is paid wages that are at or above the state or local minimum wage rate, whichever is higher. The person is eligible for the level of benefits and opportunities for advancement that are provided to other people without disabilities that are working in the same unit. And the person's employment is not tied to their services. So in other words, if they decide to get their employment services from another provider, would they lose their job? If so, that may not be competitive integrated employment. So the second part of the definition, is it integrated? Well, again, what kind of evidence would we look for to say, yes, this is integrated? First of all, the job is in a typical community setting. The person has the same opportunity to interact with coworkers without disabilities in the workplace as others who do similar tasks. So the general rituals, things like the coming and going, work hours, work shifts, breaks, are all the same as people without disabilities that are working in the same setting. And people with disabilities that work at this job are not restricted in any different way than anyone else, meaning they don't have to work a different shift or eat separately or work in a special area with only people with disabilities or paid staff. So you get, just from that definition, a little bit more of a general idea of what I'm talking about when I talk about CIE. Finally, we needed to align our employment services with the guidance provided by CMS. And several pieces of guidance that we received include waiver-funded employment services should be focused on CIE as the preferred outcome. Pre-vocational services should be designed not as an end goal, but instead to support a person on their path to CIE. Pre-vocational services should be time-limited, and what that looks like can be defined by each state individually. And pre-vocational services are not to be used for the delivery of what CMS calls vocational services, which in fact are not covered by waiver services. CMS identifies vocational services as those that are typically designed to teach job task-specific skills required by a person for the primary purpose of completing those tasks for a specific facility-based job and are not delivered in an integrated work setting. And again, I also included a link at the bottom of the slide if you're interested in reading Medicaid's waiver technical guide, which includes more information about this and other waiver information. Okay, so now is the time to start getting people that are receiving meaningful day services realigned to the proper currently existing service if they are not already. So to do that, you're going to start using a person's annual person-centered planning process to take a look and make changes if necessary. Some of those changes should be happening right now. Some of them may need to happen closer to 2020 when the new employment services come online. So what we don't want to happen is we don't want organizations to send in a mass amount of modified service funding plans all right before July 1st. So that's why we're saying now is the time to start this alignment process. Now, it's also possible that many people that you support are already aligned into the current proper service or services, and for those people, you don't have to do anything. So this is not a one-size-fits-all. Now, let me walk you through step-by-step how you can go about identifying a potential current need for service realignment. At the top in red, you'll see again that we're saying that this realignment should be happening at a person's annual person-centered planning process. So let me draw your attention to the yellowish colored boxes on this page. They represent possible activities that a person might be taking part in currently. And the pinkish boxes below them show which service or services the person should be in, both currently and after July 2020. So I'm going to take my time going through each one. Let's start all the way on the left with the orange colored box that says the person is currently in competitive integrated employment. Again, thinking back to the definition I walked through a few slides ago, right now, that person should be aligned to be receiving supported employment services. If that's already happening, then great. You don't have to do anything else because the person's already in the correct current service. However, if a person is currently competitively employed and a provider is supporting them under community development services or Habilitation, that person, during their annual person-centered planning, should realign to supported employment. And another important thing to keep in mind here, again, think back to the slide where I talked about supported employment, the person needs to be working or taking part in other supported employment activities as defined under the service definition for at least 4 hours a day in order to bill for that service. Okay, so still looking at that far left pinkish box, notice that it says after 2020, the person should then be realigned to ongoing and follow-along supports as supported employment is phased out. So in this scenario, you would have to do a realignment right now, and then again prior to 2020. And if you are saying, I don't know what ongoing and follow-along supports are, don't worry, because I will get to those in just a few minutes. So just hold that thought. And one more reminder as I walk through each of these, keep in mind that a person can receive more than one service, just not on the same day. So if a person is working in competitive employment 2 days a week and needs supported employment, the person would need their MSFP to reflect the current number of days of supported employment and the current number of days of Habilitation the person would be receiving, or whatever service that the person is selecting. Okay? All right, now we're going to shift to the next orange box that says non-work. This is pretty simple. Just like it says, it means if a person is not working, those people should be supported through either community development services or Habilitation, or potentially a combination of both. Volunteerism and time-limited paid work experience would be allowable under both of these non-work services. Okay, shifting to the next box. The person is taking part in some kind of structured and focused employment discovery or job development activities. The person should be in one of the services at the top, including employment discovery and customization, supported employment. This could also potentially include Habilitation or community development services. But after July 1st, 2020, a person would do these activities under the new waiver services called Discovery and/or Job Development. And both services I'm going to talk about after I finish with Career Exploration, so just hang tight. And the last orange box is for people that are currently engaged in the following activities: facility-based employment, small or large group employment, or some type of employment that doesn't quite fit under the definition of competitive employment. And on the next 3 slides, I'm going to walk through each of those categories of career exploration to be sure it's clear who should be getting realigned, okay? So we're going to go through it one by one. We're going to start with career exploration facility-based. This service is for people that are currently engaged in paid employment in a currently licensed facility, and this is a service that requires that the provider be a licensed provider. The person can be earning either subminimum wage or above, and under this service, a person may be doing work under an individual contract, but perhaps is being paid by the licensed provider. It can happen either in the facility or in the community. And the reason we included the and/or in the community is because it's for people that may or may not fit under small, large group employment because they're working on their own in a non-competitive situation and not necessarily part of a larger group. And a few other things I want to make clear about this service. The purpose of the service is not to provide employment to people. Instead, it is considered to be what CMS calls a pre-vocational service that instead should be focusing on soft skill development designed to support a person on their path to employment. Providers that are using this service should include in their program service plans how they plan to support people to phase out of the service because it is time limited. And I'll speak more about that in a minute. Next, career exploration small group services. This service is for people currently engaged in paid employment in groups of between 2 and 8 people, where the group completes work tasks on a contract basis. This work must be conducted at another site in the community not owned and operated or controlled by the licensed provider. Support models include enclaves, mobile work crews, and work tasks on a contract basis. Typically, the provider is the employer of record here and enters into a contract on behalf of the group. And again, as with the last slide, the purpose of the service is not to provide employment to people. Instead, the focus is on soft skill development designed to support a person on their path to CIE and identification of a plan to phase out the service. So if a person is using this service as a way to receive support in a job that may not be competitive or integrated, the team needs to be discussing what options may exist for the person. Finally, we have career exploration large group supports. This service is for people currently engaged in paid employment in groups of between 9 and 16 individuals, including the participant, where the group completes work tasks on a contract basis. Same as the last one, this work is conducted in another site in the community not owned, operated, or controlled by the licensed provider. Typically, the provider is the employer of record and enters into the contract on behalf of the group. And again, like the other two, the purpose of this service is not to provide employment to the person. Instead, the focus is on the soft skill development designed to support a person on their path to employment. And again, the identification of a plan to phase out the service. So let's talk about who will be authorized to receive career exploration. But first, let me say, if a provider organization isn't already supporting people in the activities we just talked about, like contract work, facility-based work, enclaves, mobile work crews, we don't want providers to start doing those things. And if a provider does provide these type of supports, we don't want them to be expanded. So in order to be authorized for this service, we want to know a few things about the person. Is the person currently engaged in the types of employment mentioned under this service? Does the person have a current competitive integrated employment-related outcome in their person-centered plan? If the answer to that is no, then this would not be the appropriate service for them. And we also need the barriers to employment and appropriate action plans to be noted in the person-centered plan. As mentioned several times earlier, all 3 categories of the pre-vocational service called career exploration, so that means facility-based, small, and large group, are all time limited. After July 1st, 2020, there will be a 90-day or 3-month time limit on this service. After 90 days, a person must realign to an alternate appropriate service. That means that a person that's authorized for this service between now and July of 2020 will have until October 1st, 2020 to transition into another service. Anyone authorized for the service after July 1st, 2020 will have 90 days after their service start date to transition into another service. And it's important to pause here and understand that there's not a requirement that a person has to get a job within the 90-day time period. Instead, the time limitation is on the pre-vocational service itself. There's a full menu of services available to people that are interested in work, and people should be encouraged to access whatever service best matches their personally identified outcomes. So after July 1st, 2020, people can access the services called Discovery and Job Development, which I'll talk about in just a few minutes, as well as Community Development Services and Day Habilitation Services, all of which can support people in all parts of their path toward employment. Now that we've gotten through all of that, let me just stop here and share more clearly what DDA's vision is related to the pre-vocational service called career exploration. Again, if a provider is not currently doing these type of supports, facility-based small and large group employment, don't start them. If people you support are not currently doing these activities, then they shouldn't start doing them. Providers that are doing these type of supports, we would like you to continue to build other service models of support. And because it's important for providers to hear this, DDA does not consider the use of the service called career exploration to be the preferred path to employment. Instead, DDA's preferred path to employment would be by using these individualized practices and universal principles of what we call customized employment. And these strategies are individualized, they're flexible, and they typically follow the person through some variation of community-based discovery, job development, job placement, and if needed or desired, other wraparound supports when the person is not working. This flow of service is not meant to be prescriptive in nature, meaning it's not a requirement that someone go through the flow the way that I just mentioned it, but instead it's really designed to be highly customizable and is really not contingent upon the use of a service called career exploration, even though the name of the service might sound that way. So if you'd like to read more about what customized employment is, again, I've provided a link at the bottom of this page. It's good stuff. Okay, so we've gotten through all of our current services. So if you're still with me, take a second to do a quick stretch, maybe take a deep breath and smile, because now we're going to shift to our new menu of employment services that are targeted to become available after July 1st, 2020. So actually, if you really wanted to, you could pause the video for a second, you could move around, you could go find a cookie, get a cup of coffee. I'll be right here. All right. Our first service in our new menu of employment services available after July 1st, 2020 is called Discovery. Discovery is a time-limited, comprehensive, person-centered, and community-based employment planning support service designed to assist a person to identify their abilities, the things they're interested in, and ultimately their ideal conditions for employment. And within Discovery, there are 3 distinct and separate milestones, which I'll walk you through right now. Milestone 1 typically includes a visit to the person's home or some other community-based location near their home, a survey of the community near the person's house, a general record review for pertinent information, job experience, education, various assessments, or other person-centered information like things that are important for the person, various support needs, etc. There typically would be a team meeting and collaboration with the person as well as their family and other pertinent team members, and then the completion of a Discovery Milestone 1 profile. And note that milestone number 1 must be completed prior to milestone number 2. Okay, milestone number 2 of Discovery. This includes an individualized skill assessment, learning and teaching style identification through community-based task trials, a minimum of 3 job trials or community skills observations, a team meeting or collaboration with the person and other pertinent team members to keep people abreast of what's happening during the discovery process, and finally, the completion of Discovery Milestone 2 profile. Just like the previous milestone, milestone number 2 has to be completed and submitted prior to milestone 3. Finally, milestone 3 includes creation of a visual or written resume, a team meeting or collaboration with the person and other pertinent team members, the creation of a job development plan, and the completion of Discovery Milestone Profile number 3. And those are details that we will help outline before we head into July 2020. So a couple notes about Discovery. Each milestone is a standalone billable service, meaning that they each get billed for and paid separately. Each milestone must be completed with evidence of completion, and that's what those milestone profiles should provide. So each discovery milestone must be completed in order to be paid. So unlike an attendance-based service, where you get paid for every day that a person is in the services, for a milestone-based payment, you get paid when you provide evidence that the service has been completed. Best practices demonstrate that quality and person-centered discovery milestones can typically be completed within 90 days. However, the completion of each milestone is highly flexible and will be considered in conjunction with the person's unique circumstances. So in other words, let's say a person starts the discovery process on January 1st, because why not? The person gets through milestone 1, maybe towards the end of January, but is now dealing with an unexpected health crisis. It's possible they won't be able to even start on milestone 2 until that crisis passes. There's no requirement that the profiles be submitted in a certain amount of days. It's simply a requirement that the provider must submit evidence prior to getting paid for each milestone. So this is very flexible. Service limits for discovery include that a person will only be authorized to receive discovery once every 24 months unless the person experiences an unexpected life event that would require discovery to happen more than that. To provide this service, you must be a DDA-approved employment service provider. And staff providing this service must be an approved employment services professional. And in a few slides, I'm going to talk more about training requirements for this particular service. Next, we have job development. This is our second employment service available after July 1st, 2020. Job development is support provided to a person to obtain an individual job in a competitive integrated setting in the general workforce. It can also include strategies utilized through customized employment. And again, a few slides ago, I talked about customized employment being this flexible process. It's designed to really personalize the employment relationship between the job seeker and an employer in a way that's going to meet the needs of both of them. And ultimately, it's based on that individualized match between the strengths and conditions and interests of the job seeker and the employer. And job development support can also include exploration of how a person's interests might be suited for the development of individual business ownership. Job development services will be billed on an hourly rate. And service limits include, they're limited to 8 hours a day for a total maximum of 90 hours unless otherwise authorized by DDA. Now that does not mean that the person has to receive all 90 hours in a completely back-to-back. It just means they can't receive more than 90 hours without being authorized for more. These 90 hours can be mixed with other meaningful day services within the same day, so long as it does not exceed the total of 8 hours per day. And they are limited to 40 hours per week total, including other meaningful day activities. And again, you must be a DDA-approved employment services provider, and you must be a DDA-approved employment supports professional to provide this support. Now, the next two services I'm going to talk about are designed to support the person to successfully maintain their job. First, we have what we call follow-along supports. And these are periodic supports provided to a person after they've transitioned into their job. The services include 2 direct supports with the person during a month and has a built-in assumption of 6 hours of support provided. And those include both the direct support as well as other indirect support that you might provide during the given month. The service unit for follow-along supports is monthly. And please note 2 important things about this service. Number 1, follow-along job supports can be billed simultaneously with other services, including ongoing job supports, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute. Number 2, transportation is not included in this monthly service rate. And in a few minutes, I'm going to talk about transportation, but I just wanted to throw that in there while we're talking about it. Note that a service limitation here is that a follow-along supports will not be authorized for the support of employment outcomes that don't meet the definition of competitive integrated employment. And I talked about what that looked like earlier in this presentation. Now let's move on to ongoing job supports. These are supports a person may need to successfully maintain their job. These are direct supports that are needed that go above and beyond the follow-along supports a person might be receiving. Services include supports in learning or completing job tasks when a person starts their job, or perhaps they get a promotion, or maybe there's a significant change in duties or circumstances on the job. And these are individualized supports a person may need to successfully maintain their job in an ongoing fashion. These services might include job coaching, which would be things like job task analysis, identification of adaptations that could be used on the job, self-management strategies, natural supports facilitation, assistance with fading, and things like helping to set up the workstation for success. Travel training to independently get to and from the job, personal care assistance, behavioral supports, transportation, and delegated nursing tasks are all things that could fall under ongoing job supports. The service unit for this service is hourly. When accessing this service, a fading plan should be included to the extent to which it's appropriate, so that it notes the anticipated number of hours of support that are needed. Note that unlike follow-along supports, transportation is included within this hourly rate. The service is limited to 10 hours a day or 40 hours a week and does not include volunteering, apprenticeships, or internships. And it also does not include types of employment that don't meet the definition of competitive integrated employment. Okay. Self-employment development supports. This one as well as the one after it, I'm going to provide a basic overview of what is in our waiver. But note, as the slides say, there'll be more guidance to come as it's being developed. So self-employment development supports are those that are used to assist a person whose discovery activities and discovery profile indicate a specific skill or interest that would benefit from resource ownership or small business operation. And the service includes the development of a business and a marketing plan, including identifying potential sources of business financing and other assistance in developing and launching a business. This is also another milestone-based service, which is based on the completion of both the marketing and the business plan. So in order to be authorized for this service, a person must have an employment outcome identified in their person-centered plan, and they must have also completed the discovery process, which identified self-employment as a potential path to employment. Okay, and for anyone still here, we are down to the final service here, and it's called Coworker Employment Supports. These are supports that are provided in a situation where an employer has identified an on-site job coach would not be optimal, yet the person could still benefit from additional supports. And a situation that comes to mind could be potentially a space that doesn't allow for additional people to be standing around and providing support. And maybe it just would be more beneficial to have a coworker to provide the support needed. Coworker supports are time-limited services that are provided by the employer to assist the person. Maybe they're assisted with perhaps an extended orientation or maybe training beyond what is typically provided for an employee in that same workplace. This is not intended to replace the support provider's work, but rather it's an additional mentoring or support role for which coworkers could potentially receive additional compensation above what they receive in the course of their typical jobs. However, the payment of this compensation is at the discretion of the employer, as this payment goes directly to the employer and not to a particular employee. This service is limited to the first 3 months of employment unless it's otherwise authorized by DDA under some particular situation. This service unit is monthly, and you must be an approved employment service provider. Okay, so as promised, a few words about meaningful day services and transportation. As mentioned, beginning on July 1st, 2020, DDA-funded Meaningful Day services will be paid on a fee-for-service basis. Transportation costs are included in the rates for the following services: employment ongoing job supports, employment discovery, employment job development, community development services, career exploration, and day habilitation services. As mentioned earlier, transportation costs are not included in the rates for follow-along job supports. A person receiving follow-along job supports can access the standalone waiver transportation support service to get to and from their job. If a person receives both follow-along job supports and ongoing job supports, the person can still access standalone transportation services to get to and from their job, as long as ongoing job supports or any other service is not happening at the same time. And now let me shift gears and say a few words about training requirements for some of our Meaningful Day services. So the DDA will share any and all new training requirements with stakeholders prior to finalizing. The DDA will send out correspondence to providers related to any new training requirements and timeframes as soon as they become available. After July 1st, 2020, all new hires must complete the DDA required training designated by DDA, whatever that might be. And after July 1st, 2020, all new hires must complete the DDA required training prior to independent service delivery with the person. Okay, so here you see special training requirements that are outlined for 3 of our new employment services. And those services include discovery, all 3 milestones, job development, and self-employment supports. In order to provide those services, an approved staff must have completed an Association of Community Rehab Educators, or ACRE, basic employment services training with a certificate of achievement, and/or proof of competency in the best practices of customized employment as evidenced by completing and passing the Certified Employment Support Professional, or the CESP exam, through the Association of People Supporting Employment First, or APSE. And so why does it say and/or? Let me just stop there for a minute. So it's required that everyone will have become certified by passing the CESP exam. It is proof of competency. So in other words, when you take a training, it doesn't prove that you have the competency to go along with it. It just proves that you took a training. So the CESP exam is a way to prove that the person has the competency to do the things that fall under the service. Passing this exam is evidence that the professional has the knowledge to do the work. There are rules outlined by APSE related to who is able to sit for an exam and what type of experience you need to have prior to sitting for the test. There isn't a training for the test per se. However, taking the 40-hour ACRE certified training is typically a good way to prepare for the test, along with having some experience. It's possible that someone that hasn't taken the ACRE training, that has been doing the job for a long time, and qualifies to sit for the exam, could pass it. However, most people are really going to have to go through the training in order to pass the exam. It's also important to note that once you pass the CESP, it is up to you, the professional, to maintain an active CESP certification. So again, you can find all the details and information about how to do that directly on the APSE website. On this slide, you'll find a list of current training entities that have the ACRE certified trainings available. They include Griffin Hammis Associates, Mark Golden Associates, Direct Care Online College of Employment, and Virginia Commonwealth University. And the VCU training does include some web-based options if that's something that you're looking for. Back in the fall of 2018, DDA did release a memo that outlined a reimbursement opportunity made available for providers between July of 2018 all the way up until June 30th, 2020 for the cost of completing the training and sitting for the CESP exam, as long as there is proof of completion and certification for both. So there's a link on this slide that you can go to where you can actually read the memo and all of the details. So please take advantage of that training reimbursement opportunity. After July 2020, the costs that are associated with the ongoing training will be included in the employment rate for the 3 services that I denoted. So now is a really great time to take advantage of that reimbursement. So we're wrapping up here now, but I want to leave you with some links with further resources, some of which I've already mentioned, but here they are again. You can see a link for our Employment First website. We have our comprehensive waiver application, our Employment First webinar archived page where you can see several years worth of webinars. We have the Office of Disability Employment Policy, or ODEP, their Organizational Transformation Manual 2.0, which was just developed and released in 2018. And this is a fantastic resource. I highly recommend that any organization that's taking part in any amount of transformation use this resource because it is newly updated, it's full of wonderful information, and takes the first transformation manual and really takes it to the next level. And then finally, a link to our DDA Employment First newsletters if you'd like to go back and take a look at those. As mentioned previously, DDA is working on guidance documents for all of our services. So this is just a screenshot for example's sake, but we will have one like this for Meaningful Day, one for personal and support services, and one for community living. And as soon as those completed documents are available, we will absolutely share them with all stakeholders. The next few slides just include contact information for our regional offices, and at the bottom of each slide, I've included the email address for that region's employment lead. In the central region, we have Lachelle Green, and you'll see her email address there. On the Eastern Shore, we have Kathleen Walker Roberts. Southern, we have Jasmine Thomas. And then in the Western region, we have Brenda Spiro. And finally, here's my contact information. And I ask that if you do email me with a question related to Meaningful Day services, that you also copy your region's employment lead, which is one of the people that I just mentioned. And this really just aids with the continuity and the consistency as we have multiple conversations across the state. And with that, I'd like to say a big thank you to anyone that listened from beginning to end. I know there was a lot of information, but be on the lookout for other recordings where I will walk through individualized scenarios related to this menu of employment services. I wanted to make those separate in order to not lengthen this presentation more than was necessary. So with that, I'm going to end, and thank you very much. Have a great day.